Greg Branos here for the Coachspeak Index. Oh yeah, back with another big time episode. So good, I got a frog in my throat right now. It's like Woody from Toy Story, but instead of a snake in my boots, there's a frog in my throat. I'm not even going to edit that out. I'm just going to clear my throat real quick. There we go. What a great episode this was with Ben Gretch. It's a long episode, and it's worth it. Time really did fly by. Always love talking to Ben. We talked about 21 players that we were just trying to figure out, trying to wrap our heads all the way around them and just, feel good about our understanding of them and where they should be going. Should we be taking them where they're going in drafts right now? Really great episode. I loved it so much. I think you will too. You know what? I think you'll also love Underdog Fantasy. Yes, Mr. Segway's back. Look at that. Get yourself $1,000 in bonus cash plus a free pick'em. Treat yourself. Got a code for that. QR code, bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you're a video watcher, if you're an audio listener, there's a link in the description there. All these ADPs that we talk about during this episode are on Underdog. That is where I draft. It's where I love to draft. I love firing up an Underdog draft. It fills me with joy and excitement. And when I'm done, I want to pop another one off. They're like Pringles chips. But if Pringles chips could win you $2 million. By the way, that free pick'em that you get with your sign up, maybe use it on DeAndre Swift, week 1. Higher receiving yards. I put it in the Discord that I liked his higher than 10.5 receiving yards against the Vikings week 1, Monday night, I believe that game is. And the coaches have been talking quite a bit about using DeAndre Swift in the passing game, how he is a playmaker there. The Bears, by the way, dealing with a lot of injuries in that running back room. The Vikings under Brian Flores like to blitz quite a bit. So we get some opportunities there in the passing game on checkdowns from Caleb Williams to DeAndre Swift. Like it a lot. DeAndre Swift, by the way, we talk about in this episode, which starts right now. Ben Gretch, what's up, man?
How we doing? Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on. When I had you on for a Best Ball Mania 6 live stream on Underdog, and I was like, man, I gotta get Ben Gretch back on. Would love to do just like a regular podcast with him. And I had just a few topics I wanted to cover with people, and I was like, well, I gotta get Ben on for one of these. And I thought this would be a really good one. This is players that we're trying to figure out. We can't completely wrap our heads around them right now, but we're trying to get there. And maybe as we talk it out on this episode, we'll come to a better understanding. Maybe it'll be just as murky as it was before we started here, but it always helps to kind of talk these things out. Going to start out with some running backs. First one is Breece Hall. This is a guy who, we've seen elite traits out of him. We've seen the speed. He's such a good pass catcher. This guy has like put up a really big season coming off an injury a couple years ago, and then last year fell a little bit flat, dealing with kind of a mystery lower body injury during the off season. And now in 2025, there's a new head coach, new offensive coordinator. And they are talking about, or at least Aaron Glenn, the head coach, is talking about a 1-2-3 punch in this backfield, and keeps mentioning Braylon Allen and how he's this 240-pound, locomotive who just always falls forward, so good in short yardage. And when you hear that, it's like, okay, so is Braylon Allen going to get the goal line role here? That would be terrible for Breece Hall. Where are you at on Breece Hall this season?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great one to start on. I love this topic. I told you when you brought it up to me, because there's so much uncertainty in all this stuff, and we're going to relearn that after week 1. We're going to relearn it after about week 4. We're going to relearn it after about week 8. And there are so many ways that the season can play out for a lot of these guys. And at this point in the offseason, there's so much certainty. There's so many people that play, your topic here is players we're trying to figure out. There are a lot of people out there who think they have everything figured out at this point. The thing that I think I have figured out on Breece Hall that I'm probably wrong about is that this offense is just not going to be good enough to support the running backs. But there's been some quotes from the team that, they're going to use him in some interesting ways, some different ways. There's been some stuff about him being split out and some of that stuff. And it seems to me this Lions coaching staff kind of sees him as their Jahmyr Gibbs and Braylon Allen as their David Montgomery. And it's sort of that template. But if Hall's the space back, then there's the potential for, some pretty big explosive plays. He's got that ability, certainly. It wouldn't shock me if he's actually has a solid rebound year. But at the same time, there's the element of, he wasn't very good last year in a lot of different ways. Part of the reason they may go that direction is he wasn't very good between the tackles. Braylon Allen has that skill set a little bit more. It wouldn't also shock if Allen is just winding up with more, rush attempts at a certain point this season, because they're kind of using him in that way. And they're still getting Hall the ball in space and some of those types of things. But, then you get into the question of a Justin Fields offense. And, on a lot of the pass plays, he's going to take a high rate of sacks. He's going to scramble at a high rate. You're not even going to get a pass attempt because he does both of those things at such high rates. His percentage of dropbacks that become pass attempts is going to be lower than basically any other quarterback in the league. If you look at the last several years, he's the guy that leads that particular category, or is worse than that category in terms of however you want to view that. Skill position targets in this case, it's it's bad for that part of it. So anyway, the Hall stuff is, I think it could go a lot of different ways, but probably I'm mostly fading because I just don't know how much upside there will be in the Jets offense overall and the way that they're going to play.
Yeah, you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery there. Aaron Glenn actually made that comparison pretty recently in a press conference, talking about Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, and comparing it to that situation that they had there in Detroit. This is an offense that does want to run the hell out of the ball, including with Justin Fields. And yeah, we've heard this, get Breece Hall out in space, maybe line him up in the out wide or in the slot. And, they're talking up his pass catching skills, which we've seen on display before. He has an ADP of 45 now on Underdog for a long part of the season. Before we started getting all this Braylon Allen stuff, Breece Hall was going kind of at the end of the middle third round. Now he's going at the end of the 4th round. He's dipping into the 5th round in some drafts. That's an area where when, in the 5th round, he's available, I'm taking him. I'm also taking him late in the 4th in best ball as well, just because the upside is so big. And if, he catches, let's say like 60, 70 passes this year, that's really big. And then the situation of, okay, well, they may want to start out with this 1-2-3 punch or a 1-2 punch and involve Isaiah Davis a little bit. But what if we see the Breece Hall from a couple years ago, just this super explosive athlete? Then it just makes sense, right? If we see this clear difference between Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, then it just makes sense to put Breece Hall out on the field a little bit more. Now, the metrics they weren't great for Braylon Allen last season. talk about him as one of these guys who, when you watch him on tape, when you watch the game, it's like, oh, this guy looks pretty good, and he'll bust one of these runs that every once in a while, or he'll just like get an open lane and gets that head of steam going, and you're like, okay, this is pretty dangerous here. But what if there is some growth with Braylon Allen in year 2? You know, we know, of course, very, very young player. His rookie season, what we saw there, like that's probably not the ceiling for him.
Yeah, I mean, certainly think there's growth for him. The one thing you noted that I thought was interesting was the comment about his receptions. And when I went through the projections process and looking at the Fields offense and where that's going to be from a pass volume standpoint in all likelihood, and the fact that they are going to run quite a bit, or fact, the expectation, I should say, because certainly we don't know, but you know, their whole offensive line tends towards run blockers, and they talked about this running game so much, and they've talked about how Fields' mobility presents a dynamic. There's a quote that you had from March, from the owners' meetings right after they signed Fields, how it provides a dynamic that a lot of these offenses are trying to do because of what it does to what the defenses are trying to do these days, to add the mobility at quarterback. And Aaron Glenn specifically said that in reference to, you know, part of why they brought in Fields. They're going to use him on designed runs. And when you get a run heavy offense, you get more running clocks. Obviously, you just get naturally lower play volume. And so you know, that's in addition to some of the stuff I was saying about some of the dropbacks not turning into pass attempts. Breece Hall had 76 catches 2 years ago, 57 last year. He's been a great receiving back. When I went through the projections process, I only had him at 45 this year. I think those numbers and the ones that you shared a bit ago, for me, probably feel like they're more like an upside case for him to get to where he was the last couple of years. And so that's part of it where, you know, I think if I knew he was going to hit 60 or 70 catches, I mean, I would be pretty into him. And maybe that's, you know, part of this trying to figure him out element that I'm missing. But that's the stuff that when I look at the offense, I just don't know if there's going to be that much pass volume in there for him. And maybe 40 to 50 is more like his cap. And then it gets a little trickier.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We'll most likely be at the bottom of the league when it comes to just the amount of offensive plays that they're getting off per game. Like you mentioned, the running clock from, you know, they want to run the ball a lot. Let's talk about our next running back here. This is TreVeyon Henderson. He's going one pick before Breece Hall now on Underdog at an ADP of 44 overall. This is such an interesting one. We've seen his ADP like really shoot up, and it happened just after a kickoff return, right? But everyone saw just, okay, this guy is legit super, super explosive. And I don't know what this split is going to look like when the season starts, because I don't know if TreVeyon Henderson is built for okay, this guy is a bell cow, right? He's going to be on the field just constantly. He seems more like okay, let's make sure we get this guy like 15 to 18 opportunities per game, and you know, he'll be part of like a 60-40 split in some way. They've said that they want Ramondre Stevenson to be a big part of the offense. This was, you know, after they drafted Henderson, but it was a while back. Mike Vrabel, not super reliable when it comes to depth chart coach speak and usage and workload coach speak. TreVeyon Henderson just seems like a much better player than Ramondre Stevenson. They turned down reportedly some really good offers when they were on the clock, and decided to draft TreVeyon Henderson instead of addressing, you know, all these other needs that they had on the roster. Elliott Wolf, their de facto general manager, is just completely enamored with everything that TreVeyon Henderson brings to the table in terms of just being a home run threat at all times. And then lately they're talking up his in between the tackles running as well, which was a concern for some people, and we see him score that touchdown in the preseason in between the tackles. Where is your mind at with TreVeyon Henderson?
Well, this is one you put on our list. I didn't have necessarily on our list. I guess I'm wondering, as you talk through that, what it is that you're trying to figure out, because I hear all upside when you say all those things,
Yeah, for me, I think it's more of like a managed league thing, and early on in the season, are we going to be shocked if it looks kind of similar to how it did in one or two of the preseason games where Ramondre Stevenson gets a lot of the early down work there, and he's getting 60% of that backfield work?
No, we won't be shocked at all. I think if that's not the case, then Henderson was a clear value, because this is an offense that is going to throw to the backs, that is going to probably play a little faster. They're expected to win a lot more games this year than last year by Vegas over-unders. And so they're expected to score a lot more points than the Jets by look-ahead lines and all of those things. And I think Henderson is probably their best skill position player immediately, and it's probably not particularly close. Like, the gap between him and the other backs is probably wider than like what Breece Hall is dealing with. The gap between him and the number one wide receiver is certainly wider. I think Stephon Diggs is a very talented player coming off his ACL. I think he has a chance to be very good, but Garrett Wilson in his prime, definitely a different animal there in terms of how that manifests. They threw to Henderson a ton in the preseason. I think you're just, the way that I'm thinking about it is there's this strong floor that he's going to be involved, and they're going to give him touches in space. I think they made that clear. His explosive play rate in college was so good. And then when we see the kick return TD, when we see the explosiveness otherwise in the preseason, he had a nice touchdown run. He had a catch in the first preseason game where there's an open field tackler right in front of him, and he's flat-footed, and he bounces off of it, goes and gets a first down, gets like 8 or 9 more yards, and goes and gets a first down. A guy his size and as a speed breakout player to actually have really good yards after contact numbers, this guy breaks tackles too. And I don't think people realize that. And so I think TreVeyon Henderson is going to be one of the best running backs in the NFL very quickly. Like we think of Breece Hall after his rookie year. Like we think of Bijan Robinson after his rookie year. Like we think of every year there are rookies who immediately sort of make their mark. And, Bucky Irving is, going ahead of him. And a year ago this time, people didn't know how good Bucky Irving could be. I think part of why you see the kick return lead to the huge jump in ADP is people just don't have the imagination with what's in the profile and what's on film in college. And then they see it and then they go, oh, okay, I guess this is real. But, another guy I think we might talk about, or no, maybe we don't have T-Mac, Tetroa McMillan on our list, but like I sent a tweet a little while ago that he beat Derek Stingley on a double move in a preseason game, and then Andy Dalton's hand got tipped. If we get a 55-yard TD there, I think the same thing happened to McMillan's ADP, but we didn't get it. And then people, it's literally that simple. Whether or not he did his part, but whether or not he actually scores the touchdown and has that highlight, people I think sometimes double count these things. So anyway, the point is he has that ability. TreVeyon Henderson has that ability. These guys are both incredibly good. You have them both in the league that we're doing together, the Stacked League, and I'm trying to figure out how I can trade for Henderson if you're doubting his upside.
If the offer is good enough, yeah, I guess again, my concern is more just kind of like early season in managed leagues. I think there are scenarios where we're kind of disappointed in, say, like half PPR leagues through the first few weeks of the season. But of course, we know how it works with rookie phenoms of, okay, they show something, and when they show something, they just get on the field more, and then they keep showing more, and they just get more snaps. I'm just kind of shocked to see him go.
It's all downhill. That's the big thing. Even if it's slow in the beginning, it'll just get better no matter what.
Yeah. And when you have just such a clear difference between the two running backs, or like any two players that you're kind of comparing, that helps so much, which is, again, one of the cases for Breece Hall, right? If he really is just that much better than Braylon Allen, most coaches will kind of recognize that and adjust accordingly. But yeah, I've just been kind of shocked to see TreVeyon Henderson go in like the 3rd round in a bunch of drafts that I've been in. He's going above Kenneth Walker, which I think I'd rather have Kenneth Walker. I mean, especially if we can like guarantee that he was going to be healthy, which we can't, which is baked into his ADP.
Yeah.
If we could guarantee that, he'd be a 2nd round pick.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, also, and this is a problem with me, and I know other people have this kind of mental obstacle as well of when you're taking a bunch of a player at, we were getting TreVeyon Henderson in the early 60s and in the late 50s for a while, and then the ADP shoots up, a round or two. Then it's just mentally knowing that you have all that at those prices, like, oh God, can I pay these new prices? Which you should be if you think that guy is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Next player is DeAndre Swift. Has an ADP of 68 on Underdog. This is a guy who, ever since Ben Johnson arrived in Chicago, that the narrative has been, well, Ben Johnson hates DeAndre Swift. They're gonna bring in another running back to replace him, and we're still waiting on that. In the meantime, Ben Johnson has been talking DeAndre Swift up. He's referring to him as Swifty. It's always nice when a coach has a little nickname for a guy. They're talking about how he can ignite the offense with his explosiveness and how dynamic he is. And we're just all waiting for this other shoe to drop. Are they going to trade for, a Travis Etienne or a Tank Bigsby? Who are they going to bring in? They were talking yesterday in their press conferences about, how they have injuries in that running back room. They're very, very likely to sign someone or trade for someone to bring someone in. The short yardage stuff has always been a concern for DeAndre Swift. Super low success rate on that, but we saw them in the preseason use him in short yardage. Now, again, have several running backs injured there. Kyle Monangai was not playing. Roschon Johnson was not playing this past game. But they're talking about how, yeah, we feel comfortable giving him the ball in short yardage. He's been good with his pad level lately, and we have confidence in him being able to get that yard when we need it. And then, of course, all the stuff that he does in the passing game. He's a guy that I was not really taking a lot this year in best ball, but I'm trying to adjust that now, but I'm also trying to not over adjust. And it's in the back of my mind of like, what if they do bring someone else in? How, and depending on who it is, like how much is that going to hurt DeAndre Swift? But I just can't shake the feeling that he'll be very involved in this offense, especially in the passing game. When we're talking about half PPR and PPR, that's just so valuable. And I'm now talking myself into DeAndre Swift. Where do you stand on him?
Well, I mean, I think he's a great one for this exercise. He's incredibly difficult to figure out. You just gave a lot of the reasons why it basically seems like there's no way he's not a really good pick. At the same time, he has a lot of traits that overlap with the classic like dead zone picks that became the reason, the reason that we tend to avoid running backs in this range. The guys that tend to hit from the dead zone are almost exclusively younger backs who the market doesn't know what they are yet. If the market knows what you are and values you in this way, it's usually, especially when you're in a lead back and those things, it's usually a signal that there are legitimate concerns. And when you talked about the fact that they may bring in other backs and things, I think a lot of people believe that if they had brought in another back, that back would be a really good late round pick, that person would have the potential to take over from DeAndre Swift throughout the season. And so when you get into the potential, like the discussion on a high volume back where a lot of what you're saying is not about his individual profile, but is about like the lack of options. Otherwise, that tends to be a dead zone-y trait. Having said that, there are some things that are somewhat favorable about Swift, and this is a unique situation where there's just not a lot else there. And when I shared this opinion on Twitter a little while ago, Nez from the Badge Bros made a comment to me that has stuck with me a little bit, that like a lot of those other dead zone backs were guys that didn't have the track record of a Swift. They were guys that were expected to take on a lot of work, but hadn't yet done that at any point. Swift had 250 plus carries for this team last year, almost 300 total touches. And so that's relevant as well, even though there's been a coaching change. But it's like Mike Davis, was supposed to be the guy in Atlanta a few years ago, or Zamir White last year was supposed to be the guy for the Raiders. And some of those guys you're expecting something that we haven't seen yet. And that's a little bit maybe more of the pure dead zone type back. Whereas for Swift, when the team's telling you that they're going to give him a ton of work, and they gave him a ton of work last year, and he had 270 touches the year prior in Philadelphia, it's tough to not believe that, or there's not like a ton of examples of backs where that type of thing has happened and they didn't at least get some work. And so it is complicated. I go back and forth on him a bunch. The way that I've talked about it is that I think the Chicago running backs collectively are undervalued for sure. And I wind up taking the cheaper options. And so I do get into, Monangai more than any of them. But he doesn't have a particularly great profile either. It doesn't look on paper like a guy that's going to go steal a job necessarily. It is the Ben Johnson tie-in just complicates this even more. It makes it more of a, how do we figure this out thing? Because the Johnson thing, the reason people think that he dislikes him is that the year that he took over as the offensive coordinator, he had previously worked as a position coach. And the year prior, DeAndre Swift had 11.6 attempts per game. He was a year 2 player that they had drafted in the second round. And Ben Johnson immediately brought him from 11.6 attempts per game down to 7.1, 4.5 attempts per game lower. He still threw to him some, but his receptions per game also went down by 1.4. So his touches per game down meaningfully. And that's the year where he decided to use Jamal Williams to a degree that it was over 100 rush attempts more than any other season in Jamal Williams' career. And then they brought in Jamal Williams not long ago for a tryout, to see if he wanted to come take 250 carries when they gave Swift 99 carries that year, and Jamal Williams got over 250, I think it was, or something in that range, and never got within 100 carries of that in any other year of the rest of his career. He had all those rushing TDs that year, but he was also incredibly inefficient. He had like a 3.8 yards per carry. Swift was at 5.5 that year, and didn't even get 100 carries. And so that's a whole other element of it where, maybe it's narrative that Ben Johnson doesn't like him. There was definitely a usage element there too, that Ben Johnson didn't like to use him. And then after the year, they decided to move on from him and trade him, and they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. And so, he's now coaching him again. They've got Swift under contract. There's a lot of money in that contract. He knows the offense. There's years have gone by. Ben Johnson doesn't have great alternatives. There's a lot of reasons why this time around he may actually lean into the Swift usage. But man, it's one of those things where it does feel like it's going to be fragile as the season goes along. If a running back does become available through, being cut or maybe there's a trade, I don't know. I don't know how it'll pan out, but it wouldn't be shocking if Chicago or the guys that are already on the roster, if Chicago went a different direction at running back at some point. And yet, if they don't, then DeAndre Swift's obviously a huge value. So, it's really hard to figure him out for sure.
Yeah, and if he doesn't get goal line stuff or stuff, very near to the goal line, then he does have to get all that passing work in order to pay off this ADP. But I think it's very possible in this offense where Ben Johnson's number one goal is to raise Kaleb Johnson's passing EPA. He wants him at that 70% completion percentage, and he's doing that through just like, very much a quick passing game, right? Let's they want to do the like under center thing with Caleb Williams a lot, but like, let's get under center, or if it's a 2-minute drill or whatever, up tempo kind of stuff. And let's just get the ball immediately to our playmakers and let them go to work. Zacchaeus or Burden, either one, but obviously DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and DeAndre Swift being a really, really big part of that. I think I'm I would not be, just completely shocked if DeAndre Swift ends the season with like 70 plus receptions in this offense.
Oh yeah, I think that's totally possible.
Next running back to talk about here is Cleveland Browns rookie running back Dylan Sampson. Quinshon Judkins still unsigned. They asked Kevin Stefanski in Tuesday's press conference, any update on Quinshon Judkins? He said no update. They have Dylan Sampson and Jerome Ford on the roster here. A couple weeks ago, they asked Stefanski if Jerome Ford was the RB1 there, and he said yes. And then in Tuesday's presser, they asked him if Dylan Sampson would be RB1 for week 1, and Stefanski said we'll see. So I'm we saw him get, I believe, the first team stuff in their latest preseason game when all the starters were out there. I'm trying to figure out who is the RB1 in this offense. Is it Dylan Sampson? Is it gonna be Dylan Sampson at some point? And how valuable would that be? Dylan Sampson has an ADP of 141 on Underdog right now. Seems like a really good price for a guy who could be an RB1, even if it's not the NFL's, greatest offense. What do you think, Ben?
There's a great quote from Mike Tomlin last year that it's hard to board a moving train. I believe it was in reference to Roman Wilson, exactly, in his rookie season. And I think Quinshon Judkins is going to deal with that more than the fantasy community realizes. He's not been in camp. When Luther Burden was missing camp, you had all the quotes. Ben Johnson was freaking out. And I keep using the Burden example because it's the best one of a coach freaking out, where it's like, this rookie is not learning the offense. He's not out there practicing. We thought he'd be ready. He's not ready. He was only out for like the first week in July. He got back pretty early in August.
Yeah.
But it was like day 1 install, he's not there. And then we're building off that. We're building all the checks and all the other elements of our scheme off of that. And he's not here for any of it. Quinshon Judkins, I think it's easier for a running back. But Quinshon Judkins is not like Luther Burden, where Luther Burden was still at practice. He was still able to observe. He was injured, but he could have been there, could have observed. Quinshon Judkins is not signed. He has not been at practice. There's talk that signing is going to come, but he has missed the entire training camp and preseason segment. For a rookie player, that's significant. They're still just working through getting him under contract, figuring out if there's going to be any league discipline, which there still can be pursuant to the player conduct policy. Once the player is already drafted, even if he hasn't signed his contract yet, he is suspension eligible because he's a member of the NFL's community at that point, what have you. I think it's as soon as they participate in the combine, is from what I understand. They've become a part of. They fall under the category of where their actions can be disciplined. I have no idea whether or not he'll be suspended. The charges were dropped, and presumably for lack of evidence, and there was some stuff in there about the the timing from the event to the accusation, I guess, is the way to talk about it. Obviously, it's a very sensitive topic, and the NFL does sometimes respond with suspensions. Like Ezekiel Elliott got suspended despite charges being dropped. And so there are multiple ways this could go for Judkins. Whether or not he's suspended, though, I do think he's going to need time to ramp up. And I'm saying all that about Judkins because when you think about Sampson, this is a team that's clearly going young. They traded Kenny Pickett. They're going to go with Flacco, but they kept the 2 backup rookies as their only backup quarterbacks. They are clearly going to have a role for Harold Fannin right away. They held him out in the final preseason game with the starters. They're going to roll out, like I said, Tillman and those guys. And then I think at running back, their plan was to have these 2 rookies. They basically didn't use Ford very much last year once Nick Chubb was back. They like Jerome Ford, but they basically only otherwise have Ford. Pierre Strong's been their other main guy, and they let him go. I mean, maybe Judkins gets up to speed quickly. My whole thing on Sampson is that I think he actually had a really good preseason. The reporting was all very positive, and now he's going to probably start with a pretty significant role. I think he's going to play a lot right away. Him and Ford are going to be like the main backs, and I don't think it's going to be like 70-30 Ford like some people seem to think. I think it's going to be solidly 50-50 at worst for Sampson. It may be more than that based on the way that the Browns have not always loved Ford. And then Flacco's a guy who throws to the backs a ton. I mean, that's an immobile quarterback that checks down. In their last preseason game, Sampson started, left a drive earlier than Ford. They played about 50% of all the stuff, like across the board. Dwayne McFarland had the write-up at Fantasy Life, and shout out to his great preseason usage notes. But it was 50% of the snaps exactly. And then even all the like touch notes, they matched. Like they had like the exact same line. They used exactly 50-50 in terms of touches and usage and all of that. And Flacco threw to the backs. He completed a combined, I think, 3 passes to these guys. And so in the first quarter, in just a little bit of time, he threw to the backs a ton. Sampson caught a pass. I think Ford ended up catching 2 passes, but his second one, I just said they had the exact same usage. The same usage until Sampson left the game. His second one was when Ford was still on the field and Sampson had already been taken out and like sort of put in bubble wrap after two drives. But you also saw that element that I'm discussing where Flacco's going to throw to these backs. They have 3 catches in 1 quarter. And so anyway, I think it's actually going to be a little bit more of a lucrative backfield than people realize from the reception standpoint. There's probably not going to be a ton of TDs, but I really like Sampson, man. I think he's a really interesting late round pick right now that's going to play more than people realize and maybe have the opportunity. He's got a good prospect profile, maybe have the opportunity to really hold that longer than I think people think. If they really sat with the range of outcomes and thought about how quickly Judkins can make an impact, it just feels like it's going to take longer. I mean, we'll see how that plays out, but that would be my thoughts.
I believe they made Jerome Ford take a pay cut to stay with them for this season. And yeah, I think the plan was Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. So, if Judkins plays at some point, like it might be just kind of replacing the Jerome Ford role, but that role increasing as he's back into game shape. But Dylan Sampson at 141 does seem like a really, really good value right now on Underdog. Next running back here is Bill Croskey-Merritt. This was one that was on both of our lists. Ben, if you want to start us off here.
Yeah, no, I can't figure him out at all. I mean, this is the really tough one. He's got a fun profile. He got used a bunch in the preseason. There's also the element of like, and obviously the Commanders trade away Brian Robinson, but there's the element of like they traded away Jahan Dotson right around this time last year, and it wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't for Luke McCaffrey or whoever the rookie you might have thought it was, because that's what I thought. I was excited about Luke McCaffrey once they traded away Jahan Dotson. He didn't do anything, right? Like it was more about getting rid of Dotson and moving forward with the roster that they had. And Robinson hasn't been so dynamic that you would think that he had to stick around. I mean, he's been a good success rate rusher and a volume player. They like what guys like Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols bring them on special teams. And once JCM made the roster, BCM, JCM, whatever his name is, once he made the roster and clearly made the roster, which is what I think the big story is from his August, then they had to make a decision of, okay, here's the 4 running backs we're keeping. We're keeping Eckler, and we're keeping JCM, and Rodriguez and McNichols are key players in terms of the depth they provide, the special teams, snaps and ability that they provide. McNichols, I think, provides depth and redundancy in the pass game for Eckler. It's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. It's possible that Chris Rodriguez is inactive week 1, which would be very positive for Bill, but it's also positive or possible that all 4 are active and Bill doesn't even get the most carries, that, it's mostly Eckler, that they use Chris Rodriguez situationally in short yardage or what have you. And Chris Rodriguez, by the way, has not had a ton of touches, but has been really efficient so far in his career. Yeah. He's had really good just yards per carry numbers, but also if you look at like the yards after contact, which obviously those things correlate, his missed tackles forced have been like pretty darn solid for such a small sample so far in his career. And then he's had some explosive runs, which is something that, Jayden Daniels operating the offense is going to open up explosive runs. And that's a very big positive for Bill, because that's a part of his profile that's certainly there. We saw a 20+ yard touchdown run in the preseason already. It's really hard to figure out the way that this is going to play out, who's going to win, but somebody's going to be hitting for some long runs in this offense. There's going to be some running back value and some big plays. But it could be Chris Rodriguez who does a little bit more. It could be that JCM just sort of made his way onto the roster, which made Robinson expendable, but doesn't mean that he was the clear 20-touch guy. Or it could mean that. Those are all the things that it could mean as well, right? It could mean that he comes out in week 1 and gets a bunch of touches. And if he does, then, it's wheels up.
Yeah, I'm really trying to wrap my head around this one. You have basically 2 roles for the Commanders, and one of them is the Croskey-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez Jr. style. And then separately, you have Austin Eckler and Jeremy McNichols, which that should be occupied mostly by Austin Eckler, who played a little bit north of 52% of offensive snaps last season. We get the quote from Dan Quinn about, hey, you see Chris Rodriguez Jr. being your goal line back? And he said yes, but also part of his answer, he did this thing that like Dan Quinn does where he just kind of rambles and says things, which to me feels like a bit of a signal whenever he does this, that he's like not truly believing in what he's saying. He's just like answering back to this question of the reporter being like, hey, will he be your goal line back? Okay, yeah. And like ramble. It didn't sell me, 1,000% that, yeah, okay, yes, Chris Rodriguez Jr. has this goal line role on lock. And then Bill, and I'm trying to refer to him as Bill Croskey-Merritt because that's what he prefers. That's what the coaches and everyone have been referring to him as. So I'm trying to train myself to do this. But I mean,
it's such a random nickname.
It really
I mean, there's obviously a reason behind it, but it is.
Do you know the?
No, I don't. I'm just
yeah.
I didn't realize that all the coaches were referring to him by the same name and everything. I got to get better at it too.
When he was a kid, his head was shaved, and it reminded people of Little Bill from the animated Bill Cosby show. So people called him Bill. Okay. And that's what he likes to go by now is
I feel like that's not the namesake that I would want to stick with. I think I would just go back to Jacory.
Right. Yeah. Man, I'm going by
checking down the decision making.
I'm going by Ted Branos now after Ted Bundy.
Yeah. That's the last Bill that I would have thought you told me.
I was very surprised when I heard it. Different time. But his college tape looked really good, just super. And I know he's a 7th round pick, but super shifty, exciting running back. Not great in pass protection, but they're probably not going to ask him to do a lot of pass pro there. But just a very exciting young runner. Probably falls a little bit because of the whole very weird thing that happened last year where he's not able to play college football because of some technicality on this jersey number has already been worn or whatever, just like the weirdest NCAA typical shit there. But going, he has an ADP of 107 on Underdog. This is kind of like the Tyrone Tracy territory. So you're taking him like right around there. It's basically right above kind of the premier handcuffs, like Zach Charbonnet goes right after Croskey-Merritt right now. I don't know what to do with him. By the way, his projection on Underdog for week 1, 21.5 rushing yards, which I Which, I mean, that might be a slider, right? Where you just
Yeah.
like, slide it up to like 50, 60 yards
Yeah.
and
That makes me want
go
to
nuts,
hammer that, especially we're just
doesn't
talking
it?
about how the running backs in the Washington offense tend to get some room to run. The way they run that whole offense with the RPOs and they throw quickly to the edge if you don't have enough numbers out wide, and you have the Daniels effect where he can pull, and run around the end, which always holds the edge rushers and is a big reason why running backs with mobile quarterbacks like Daniels have such strong efficiency. We see these running backs. We saw it last year a lot with Robinson, with Eckler. We've seen it in the preseason, like the long run for Croskey-Merritt. It's runs that are straight line forward between the tackles, but there's just a hole, a big hole, and they get going 20, 30 yards downfield. That was how, Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt wasn't like a big, like a sweep or a wide run. It was up the middle, then he veers out wide. That's the way that Chris Rodriguez's big runs were. It's nice. You don't need a ton of talent necessarily as a running back when you can just run straight and the holes are there because the offense stretches the defense out horizontally pre-snap so well. So anyway, you're telling me his line's 21. Are you sure it's not as long as Rush? Like, I mean, it feels like he could go over that on one play, right?
21 and a half rushing yards for the game. Talking about that, the one thing that really stands out to me about Croskey-Merritt on those inside runs is when a linebacker or safety or someone comes up to tackle him, he's so shifty, so good at making that guy miss. And if you make that guy miss, and now all of a sudden, like, you're getting to the second level, that's where those big things happen. That's where that's what happened in the preseason with
and that
him.
shows up in his data from his junior year. Like you said, he didn't play a lot last year, but his missed tackles forced, his evasion numbers were really, really strong.
Yeah, very high. A little bit of concern with, Jayden Daniels probably about 8 to 10 rushes per game. Deebo Samuel, who we'll talk about, is going to get his share of backfield touches. Not going to be crazy, probably, two or three per game. But then you factor in Austin Eckler, and if Chris Rodriguez Jr. isn't completely phased out, right? If they do have him active, if he is actually their goal line back, then he would be active on game day. So like, you'll want to give him some touches as well. So it might be a situation where Croskey-Merritt just has to be very, very efficient on those touches, which I think he could be. But this price is getting very, very expensive on him.
It's
now.
getting expensive, and that's what's the hardest part to figure out is once he's going well ahead of some of the other rookies, I have to ask myself those questions too. Because I mean, we talked about Dylan Sampson. I really like Breece Tootin, who's not going to have the early opportunity, but could be a smash in that Liam Cohen offense if it opens up for him. Like, it seems like it could. He's going ahead of like Cam Scatterbu now, who was going a lot higher earlier. Jaden Blue. There's a lot of these guys that I really like, and so that's where I start asking myself the question is, if I'm taking him in every single draft, every time he gets up to that level, what's the opportunity cost? Who am I not getting exposure to? Because those guys maybe have more ceiling. Who knows how their seasons play out. So he's a very tricky one to figure out. He does seem like the one that has the clearest signal from all of August, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to score the most fantasy points all season.
Right. It was a very, very loud drumbeat from beat reporters there in Washington of like, man, this guy looks incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So we will.
He's definitely going to score some points. Like that's the thing that the drumbeat. He's got a floor. That guy's going to score some points this year. I understand why his price has risen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in best ball, completely understand getting him on teams. Might be a little bit rougher in managed leagues. But if he just blows people away the way that beat reporters were talking about him during training camp, then okay, Chris Rodriguez, have a seat, my friend. Austin Eckler, we're gonna play you 40% of snaps and instead of the 52 you were getting last season. Next player here has an ADP of 99 overall on Underdog. This is the guy that you submitted, and I also submitted his teammate. This is J.K. Dobbins, if you want to lead us off here.
Yeah, I mean, Dobbins last year coming off an Achilles looked good. His first step quickness was good. The long speed wasn't there. That's more of a year 2 return thing. Very good player. 20 plus catches all 3 years at Ohio State. Has never played in an offense that actually throws to the backs because he's been in Greg Roman offenses, both in Baltimore and with the Chargers. And now he's in an offense that last year gave 70 targets to Javonte Williams, despite the fact that he was pretty clearly not anywhere near what he used to be. And so I mean, RJ Harvey, the reason I said Dobbins instead of Harvey, I think this backfield's very fascinating. RJ Harvey looks incredible, but he's also a rookie. I think he could really hit. And I'm really into both of them because I think there's going to be a lot of receiving for these guys. I think there's going to be a lot of scoring in this offense. One of the big stats last year with the Javonte's inability to convert rushing TDs, and then Jaleel McLaughlin was struggling, is that the Broncos just leaned really heavily toward the pass TD. I think it was like 32 pass TDs versus like whatever it was, 10 rushing TDs. They were one of the lowest rush TD teams among like playoff teams that were actually good. It's 30-12, not 32-10, but they were basically like a almost 2-to-1 or 2.5-to-1 ratio. That's a little bit wider of a gap between pass and run TDs than most teams, and specifically a lot of Peyton teams. You think back to those Saints teams where like Mark Engram would run for a lot of TDs, Alvin Kamara would run for a lot of TDs. He likes to run the ball in close. He just didn't have the backs last year. I think this team's going to run the ball in close better. Great offensive line. We're going to see more rushing TDs. I don't think that's like a huge negative for Bo Nix because I think we're going to see more TDs overall. This looks like a really good offense to me that's going to take a year 2 step forward. But as far as Dobbins is concerned, man, like I'm trying to figure out if I'm too high on him because I've continued to kind of push him up from this perspective that I've always wanted to get access to the Peyton backs. And I'm not out on Harvey by any means. I'm drafting a ton of Harvey. I have him ranked as a clear target as well. But Dobbins being the cheaper one, whenever I miss on Harvey, I look at Dobbins and I'm like, man, I think he's going to – there's the issues with Harvey and pass blocking. Harvey's going to get early down targets. A lot of good analysts have pointed this out that Peyton throws to the running backs with intent on early downs. So Harvey doesn't have to be a great pass blocker on third downs to get a lot of targets. But that is the role that Javonte Williams had all last year, was the protector and all of that stuff. That's how you get to the 70 targets. I don't think J.K. Dobbins is going to have 70 targets. I do think he's going to set a career high in receptions this year pretty easily because he's never been in an offense like this. I think he's going to be the pass down protective guy and be out there on a lot of plays that where he will leak into space and catch passes. And I think he's got the quickness and the short area burst still enough from last year that we saw to play into the red zone area where, I mean, the other thing about Peyton is he's never really had like a clear like goal line back. He likes to use multiple backs. Like even within like a series, he won't give the same back multiple carries in a row. He just last year, I was on Javonte too much last year, but if Javonte didn't score on first down, he would put in Jaleel and run him on second down. And he used to do this with Kamara and Engram and a lot of guys. And you'd get just a split down in close. So I think you're going to get that. I think Dobbins is going to be good enough in close to stay down there. He was good. He was effective in close last year, and he's got that little short area quickness. I think Harvey's going to score rushing TDs as well. I'm not trying to say that he won't, but I think Dobbins could be really interesting. And so I'm trying to figure out if I'm just a little too hyped on this guy that does have a really exciting rookie in his backfield. But yeah, I'm playing them both. I'm playing them both pretty aggressively.
Yeah, I haven't been as high on J.K. Dobbins, and it's not like, oh, I know I'm right in this situation. It's actually more of like, oh man, it's people seem really into taking J.K. Dobbins at his ADP. He is a good pass catcher, so like he's going to get work there. I think what I'm most worried about is he actually playing, during the fantasy playoffs, because he has this like brutal injury history. We saw him miss time last year, and we saw him just like really worn down at the end of the season. I mean, the top end speed is just no longer there with Dobbins. Explosiveness is something that Sean Payton was lacking in his offense last season, and he talked about it a lot during this offseason. Of course, they draft RJ Harvey, who, by the way, was coveted by the Jaguars by James Gladstone and Liam Cohen reportedly. So, and anytime those guys are in on someone, it makes me think a little bit higher of that player. What you mentioned about J.K. Dobbins, though, which is very strong, is that short area quickness and his vision. He has excellent vision. So for a running back who doesn't have this like crazy speed, right? Like that's okay for Peyton. Sean Payton is really big on just keeping the offense on schedule. Like he doesn't need all the really big explosive plays. He just wants like a few yards at a time. This is why they were so into Bo Nix, is because Bo Nix, when he takes the snap, they so rarely end in negative plays. Like he's not getting sacked. He's not throwing bad interceptions. Usually the worst thing that'll happen is just like he'll throw the ball out of bounds. He's so good at that. So then having a running back like J.K. Dobbins, who, the speed doesn't matter that much if you have excellent vision, right? You see where the hole is, and boom, that's an automatic, 3 or 4 yards rushing right there, maybe a little bit more. And Sean Payton referred to it as J.K. Dobbins having that little special spaghetti sauce,
There you go.
which is just a beautiful analogy and really true, right? So for this coach who was so big on just like, all right, we have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, and we're gonna paper cut you to death, and we're gonna march all the way down the field. And J.K. Dobbins, I could absolutely see as being a big part of that. And then when you have this rookie running back and RJ Harvey, who, they're talking about, okay, yeah, he bounces things out to the outside a little more than he should, which they don't hate, because I can't tell if they would prefer him not to do that or not, because they're talking about how, well, sure, like may not be ideal, but there are times where he's bouncing it to the outside where you think, okay, you probably shouldn't bounce it outside there, and just rips off this really big run. And we've gotten a couple quotes from Peyton and this coaching staff about, whether it's in practice or in a preseason game of, man, RJ Harvey had this run today, and we just looked at each other. We were like, wow. And Peyton said the same thing about looking at when they were watching RJ Harvey's tape. Is like, man, the explosive runs that this guy put on tape were just, we thought it was unbelievable. So, when you're looking at everything they said during this offseason about, we want to be more explosive, that tends to, go hand in hand with RJ Harvey. And Sean Payton loves to get this rotation of running backs going. We like you mentioned, we saw it last season. There were drives where 3 or 4 different running backs would be in there, just one play after the other. I think it was a primetime game that they were doing that really heavy. I think ship chasing might have been, I guess, like a Thursday night game, and everybody on ship chasing was like, oh my God, it's another running back in here for Sean Payton. So yeah, for me, it's just what's the ceiling case for J.K. Dobbins? Like what's the best scenario that we envisioned? I'm curious what your projections for him are. Is it north of 200 carries and like a 35 or so receptions?
The big thing that the stat that I've always loved and used, and I've referred to the high value touches before, which is a combination of receptions and green zone touches inside the 10-yard line, because so much of running back upside is from those two types of touches, as opposed to all the running plays that happen from further away from the end zone, basically, which are, more low value touches in terms of how they translate to fantasy points. And so my argument with Dobbins, so just to answer your direct question, I have 125 carries and 43 catches. It's not huge, but it is a little bit more split toward the receptions, where he is catching 43 balls because he's playing on those pass downs. And then it would mean that he would also carry a pretty decent touchdown rate. And so you'd have this combination of catching enough passes and scoring enough TDs. I don't know that the true ceiling would be, massive, but I do think the Broncos, in terms of like a team high value touch situation, will be among the top teams in the NFL. They were top 5 in pass targets to the running back last year, even with a bunch of running backs that were bad. And they started using Marvin Mims as their back. Like they started the early down passes I was talking about, they had Mims in the backfield and were throwing to him within 10 out of the backfield because they were like, we don't have any other running back that we actually want to use. And so those weren't running back targets. Obviously, with Harvey and Dobbins in there, I think you're going to see them get back to what Peyton's always done, which is use the running backs in the passing game as a huge weapon. And you go back to his Saints years and stuff. That stuff was through the roof. You look at even the year prior with Russell Wilson. You could say it's all Drew Brees, but Russell Wilson in 2023 went from a guy who basically never threw to running backs to suddenly throwing to running backs a ton in 2023 with the Broncos. It's just always been a big part of what Peyton does. And it's a play design where it's not about getting to a check down. It's about throwing to the running back with intent. And so I do think this is a team that's going to be very high in overall running back targets. And I think Dobbins is going to get his share of that. I have him as getting less rushing work than Harvey, because as the season goes along, I kind of do think the rookie is going to get the rushing work, but them to be closer in the receiving side, which is maybe not the way that people would think about it, but that's sort of how I'm visualizing it and how I think Dobbins got to have some upside at that point.
Yeah, I really, the more I think about it, I think that goal line role could be just very heavy J.K. Dobbins, because when we're talking about these R.J. Harvey runs where the instincts / vision aren't completely there, right? He uses his athleticism to kind of bail himself out at times. That's not really what you want around the goal line there, right? Because you're turning a possible 0 yard gain or 1 yard gain into a 5 or 6 yard loss, and now it's 2nd and goal from the 7. So yeah, okay, but I think I'll be a little bit higher on J.K. Dobbins after this conversation here. Next running back is somebody you submitted, has an ADP of 16th overall on Underdog. This is Miami Dolphins running back Devon Achane. Start us out, Ben.
Well, yeah, you want to talk about running back receiving and high-value touches. Achane had 10 more catches than any other back in the NFL last year, despite having these massive splits when Tua was in and Tua was out. In the 11 games Tua played, he had over 6 catches per game. In the 6 that he missed, he had 1.8. So less than a third of the catches per game. And so had Tua, even if you regress the 6 per game from the 11 games a little bit, had Tua played more games last year, he may have gapped all the other running backs. I think he's going to probably gap the other running backs if Tua plays a lot this year. They use him on quick hits to the edge because they can't necessarily run in between the tackles. Their offensive line's not great, and it helps them kind of protect Tua a little bit. The other guy they were doing that with a lot was Jonnu Smith. I think you're going to get some more Malik Washington than people realize in this offense. People are saying Miami's offense, terrible vibes. They're going to be terrible. I do think that's possible. It doesn't look great, but people are way too confident in that because this is an offense that can be very lucrative for fantasy. It can really consolidate volume. Jonnu Smith was a huge tight end play late last year. Like I said, Achane had more catches than any other running back by 10 last year, even when he had these huge splits. In the years prior, you had the massive Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle usage. And so this is definitely an offense we want to target with Tua at the helm. As this distributor, he's accurate. You get a lot of catches. You can Mike McDaniel, maybe not better than anyone at this point, but was one of the guys who started, I think, a trend that we've seen more of, where a lot of these play callers have gotten a lot better at getting the ball into the hands of the best players, as opposed to like a play design that has, a read element to it. And then you're kind of taking what the defense gives you. Some of these newer offenses are more, and McDaniels for sure, like the way that they can concentrate volume into their best players' hands when they're on the field is really impressive. Liam Cohen did it last year with the Bucs. It's a big reason I'm excited about the Jags. He was able to get both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to career high yards per route. And there's a few different coaches that do this really, really well. But so Achane's got this injury right now, and he's falling. His ADP is falling, and people are concerned. And I'm concerned. At the same time, both of his backup running backs got hurt. Alexander Mattison was like winning the camp battle, and he's out for the year. Jalen Wright got banged up. Seems like that's not long-term, but now his only real backup is a rookie, Ollie Gordon, who's had a great August, but they're thin behind Achane. So if Achane is healthy, and this is already an offense that can really consolidate volume, and he already had these huge splits with the receptions, and 2 is healthy right now, you have the potential for him to be catching so many more balls than any other running back because of how they use him on the quick hits and the different things they do in the pass game. I mean, he could just be even in half PPR, right? I mean, like it doesn't matter. Like you're catching so many balls, you're getting into space this much. He could be the RB1. I mean, he could easily be the RB1, I think, from a usage perspective, especially, and with how efficient he can be if he starts hitting on some big plays on top of that, he could outscore everybody. And so, I mean, he's just one of these guys that is tough because the ceiling is so clear, but also the offense and the injury and all of those things are a concern too. I mean, it's how much risk do you really want to take on for theoretical ceiling?
Yeah, they seem to think he'll be ready for week 1. General manager Chris Greer said that today as well. Achane, there aren't a lot of players in this Miami offense that I think are just like game script proof or like whatever is happening proof, whether it's the offensive line or the quarterback or whatever. Devon Achane is one of those guys for them, where if the offensive line actually, gives us some decent play, right? If they surprise us and they're just like a league average offensive line, then I think we see the Devon Achane that we saw a couple years ago, where just, oh my God, like this guy is incredible as a rusher, but we also know he's so good as a pass catcher. So if the offensive line is in big trouble like it was last year, then like you said, I think we see this kind of a similar offense to where they are just getting the ball in the hands of their best players. They're just doing all this quick, short stuff to Devon Achane, and like you said, I think Malik Washington could play a very big part in Miami this year in that same kind of role that Jonnu Smith was occupying there, where he wasn't really a tight end. He was just kind of like a slot receiver for them. So maybe we see some 11 personnel there in that offense. But yeah, Achane's a guy that could average in half PPR. He could average like 7 points a week just from his receiving work, and like not even factoring in, touchdowns that he scores from receiving. So yeah, calf injuries could linger, but it's not 100% that it will. I think Jeff Mueller just put out a tweet in the last few days about, I think it was like 18 of 21 running backs or players that were dealing with a calf, just they were fine for the rest of the season, right? It's a short-term thing. They get over it and they don't suffer a setback. Obviously, there's potential to suffer a setback, but you can't just wipe a player off your board, right? Unless you think there's a 100% chance of a setback. We're drafting all these teams at volume when we're talking about best ball, and even people who are in a lot of managed leagues. Like, you can't just completely take this guy off your board, because what if he does stay healthy, which is the likeliest scenario, right? Is that he does stay healthy. So definitely would want to have some exposure to Devon Achane. Next running back here is one that, again, we both had on our list. This is Pittsburgh Steelers rookie running back Kaleb Johnson. Ben, start us out, man.
Yeah, I mean, he's been tough. The first preseason game, and I always watch all the preseason games and write them up over at my newsletter, and he had a 2-play sequence. The talk has been in the past game that he's not really been able to he didn't do a lot of it at Iowa. He was mostly just a rushing back, and that's a very run-heavy offense. So there's a big question, but he wasn't very good at the pass game stuff that he did do. He had a 2-play sequence where he is helping on like a little chip block, and Mason Rudolph doesn't have any downfield, and his eyes drop to Kaleb Johnson, who he's looking to get open and like release and get open, and there's space for him to get open. And Johnson, I shared a screenshot. It's so funny, but he's disengaged from the block. He goes and re-engages to like provide a support block to a lineman who doesn't need the help in a situation where he very clearly at this point needs to be making himself available for a reception. Rudolph is looking for that. Rudolph ends up getting sacked because his outlet never outlets. And then the very next play, they throw to Caleb. They have just Kaleb Johnson release. They throw to him really early on the down, bounce right off his shoulder pad. And so it's like 2 plays in a row where he doesn't handle the protection and release element correctly, and gets his quarterback sacked. And then the very next play, he has a drop. And you're like, man, this guy, he's got to show that he can get up to speed in the pass game quickly to play in that on that side of things in his rookie season. Jaylen Warren is good at this. Kenneth Gainwell has been a pass down back his whole career. They bring him in. They like him. They're talking about using him. They're playing him a little bit in front of Kaleb Johnson in the preseason, which isn't a big deal. Kenneth Gainwell is probably not going to stop a Kaleb Johnson breakout if that comes, but it's meaningful in the sense that the pass game stuff is really meaningful for overall upside. I do think Kaleb Johnson still has the potential to be the big, lead rusher, especially down the stretch and in the second half of the year and those things. He looked a little better as a rusher in the second and third games. The first preseason game, he didn't look great either, but he's got some good rushing metrics and underlying data and all that stuff. But right now, man, Kaleb Johnson looks like a guy who's probably not going to be super involved early because he didn't have a great preseason. He didn't look very good. He got what was blocked in the second and third games. I didn't think he added a ton to what was there in front of him. They really like him. You had the quote where, Arthur Smith who's a crazy person, but he had the quote that he loves his, he's a volume runner, and he referenced his fourth quarter yards per carry, and he just loves the way he can build throughout a game. So obviously that kind of stuff is bullish, that at some point he could be the guy who's getting 20 plus carries and the new Najee Harris and those things. But it's a tricky one to figure out. I'm not usually out on rookies. I'm not completely out on him, but I'm also effectively out. I've moved him down my ranks, and I'm not taking him very much.
Yeah, both offensive coordinator Arthur Smith and head coach Mike Tomlin, after they drafted him, both referred to him as a volume runner. And they asked Mike Tomlin what they liked about Kaleb Johnson. He was like, turn on the tape, man. Just look at him. And they kept talking about we need explosive runs. We need an explosive running back. And we think that Kaleb Johnson brings that to the table. Mike Tomlin chalked up that first preseason outing where he didn't look great, chalked it up to just kind of first game nerves, right? The lights are on for the first time, playing real-ish football for the first time, and said, I think you'll see him in the next games kind of start to come into his own. We expect him to get better, and he did look better in game 2 and 3. I don't think he's like a total zero as a pass catcher. Like I don't think he's, say, like what we saw from Tank Bigsby in his first NFL season. But from everything they've said, especially early, it seemed like the plan is definitely not like, hey, let's pass the ball to Kaleb Johnson a bunch, or even like have him out there on third downs. It seemed pretty clear that this is the vision for him is a first and second down grinder, basically.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily great if they're splitting work too.
Yeah.
It's definitely not great. It's worse than not necessarily great. It's definitely not ideal, especially in an offense. It's probably going to be slow paced, and Rodgers loves to run the play clock down, and it's not great.
And Tomlin last year, the Steelers were, I think, like fourth in running the ball, but near the bottom of the league in productivity, and they asked him like, why do you keep running the ball if you're not being productive while you do that? And he said, well, we're playing against Joe Burrow and all these guys. Like, we're just trying to control the clock, right?
They're trying to win 17-13. They're going to do that all year. That's their goal. Yeah.
And you would think that Kaleb Johnson will be the goal line back for Pittsburgh with just, his stature and his profile and everything. But also important to consider, Aaron Rodgers, when his offenses get to the goal line, Aaron Rodgers loves to pad Aaron Rodgers stats. He loves to throw the ball when they're down at the 1 and the 2 and the 3 yard line. So that could be potentially infuriating for Kaleb Johnson managers this season. Next, or final running back here is Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals, who you nominated to talk about today. So Ben, lead us off.
Yeah, I think he's a tough one. He was a 21-year-old rookie, had really good evasion numbers and good prospect profile, but then didn't play very much as a rookie. Now he's only a 22-year-old. He's still very young. There's still plenty of runway in front of him. He's behind a veteran in James Conner that isn't a huge threat. They haven't added any other running backs to the backfield, which has got to be a good signal for what they think about Trey Benson. But why didn't they use him very much last year? That's not a great signal. They love Conner, and they talk about Conner as a clear workhorse, but there's been some talk this year. Maybe they have 2 number ones now or something, where they're trying to say it in a way that Benson will get more work. I guess the main thing is whether he's going to have standalone value or just be a pure handcuff is the thing I'm trying to figure out. Because if he has standalone value, that gets pretty sweet, pretty quick. And there's not really much competition for the RB3 stuff. They still have Demercado and DJ Dallas and those guys they'll play on pass downs a little, but Benson's profile is interesting. I mean, it's very interesting, and it's not dissimilar from like Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, for example. Like, we don't have a huge sample. He didn't have huge like workhorse volume, but the per touch stuff, the evasion stuff, all that was very, very good. And so you expect that there would be some explosive play potential for him if he was the guy getting a lot of work. But he's obviously, he's going into year 2. He's a lot less sexy at this point, but I want to know if he's going to have standalone value. That's the part of it that I can't figure out.
Yeah. So their head coach, Jonathan Gannon, was asked, I think it was at the combine, of, hey, do you think they could be 1A, 1B with James Conner and Trey Benson? And he offered like a lot of qualifiers, right? Like, if Trey Benson can take the leap, blah, blah, blah. Then just take us down a little timeline of comments here on this backfield. May 28th, Jonathan Gannon says James Conner is getting himself ready to carry the load for us. July 25th, Gannon was asked whether Trey Benson can take a little more off of James Conner's workload this year. Gannon said, quote, "We'll put whoever out there we think can get it done," end quote. Usually that's kind of like a layup question for a coach to just be like, yeah, we think he could, potentially get in the mix a little bit more. On July 27th, Jonathan Gannon said, "I feed off of James Conner's energy a ton, and I think our team does as well. His play style leads to that. It looks good when he's running through people's faces. Guys get juiced about that." On July 28th, offensive coordinator Drew Petzing was asked whether James Conner is still the workhorse back. He said, quote, "Absolutely. I think James has proven that over the last couple years. Just the way he carries the ball and what he brings to the offense, I think that's always going to be the case," end quote. He was asked in that same presser whether he anticipates Trey Benson having a bigger role last year. He said, quote, "Yes and no. I think a lot of that is going to be predicated on what we're doing in a given game and what we're trying to accomplish. And again, what we're seeing on defense," end quote. And then on August 2nd, we get this quote from James Conner, who said that said about Trey Benson that, quote, "We're both RB1. He's going to play a lot this year." And then people were like, yes, I told you RB1, 1A and 1B here. But then on August 5th, a few days later, Jonathan Gannon was asked whether the message from the coaching staff to James Conner and Trey Benson has been that the Cardinals have 2 RB1s. He said, quote, "Not from me. It's compete for your role." Probably what they're alluding to, both of those guys, is they both want to play and they both think they can impact the game in a positive way. And I agree with them. end quote. So, yeah, it seems they are still very, very, very much James Conner is the workhorse in this backfield. And I think a bet on Trey Benson is just like a bet on James Conner not staying healthy this season.
Yep.
Let's move into some wide receivers. First one up, you nominated Ricky Pearsall, who has an ADP of 59th overall on Underdog. Where's your head at with Ricky Pearsall?
Yeah, I mean, everything's broke right for him. He's going to get a lot of work early. He only had a 14% targets per out last year. He closed well, but he had a long stretch of not really earning any volume. The quotes from the team, it's so funny. I was talking with a buddy about him recently. Your quotes, they're favorable, but they always include an element of like, there's still some timing stuff and connection issues with Purdy, and he's not necessarily getting out of his routes. He's not necessarily hitting his marks. He's not always where he needs to be necessarily. They're getting better. They're optimistic for sure, but it is a little bit tricky in terms of, eventually, like I assume Juwan Jennings is going to play. Eventually, Brandon Ayuk's going to come back. I don't know how healthy he's going to be in those things, but it's going to get crowded again if CMC stays healthy this time around and Kittle stays healthy this time around. Well, Kittle did last year, but Ayuk and CMC were both out, and Deebo had pneumonia and all these things. And Jennings had a 26% targets per out because they needed somebody to step in and actually earn volume, and he was basically double what Pearsall was at. Now, obviously, Pearsall's a rookie. He got shot. All of those things are very true. It is still, a notable thing that, while running a lot of routes and playing and them needing to get the ball to certain places, that he had some long stretches where he wasn't getting a lot of volume. So it's he's a tricky one. I think he needs to have a real breakout to be super meaningful, but at the same time, it does seem like they're going to give him every opportunity to have that breakout this year. They kind of need him to be that dude.
Yeah, the quote you were alluding to was from August 16th in a Kyle Shanahan press conference. He said, Ricky Pearsall is a real good route runner. Sometimes he gets too concerned with beating the guy and understanding that he's got to do it in the time when Brock Purdy is looking at him. That's something those guys have really been working through and getting really good at. Yeah, so like I would say a tiny concern, but one that will eventually probably not be one, because when you look at the context of everything, he missed so much time last year in training camp. He has the hamstring. He gets shot. He also misses a little bit of time this year with, I believe, another hamstring injury. And I think that is more concerning to me than like them eventually getting this timing down, because we did end up seeing in the preseason where like there's that one throw from Purdy to Pearsall. I was like, oh my, like how does he thread that needle to him there? Just like excellent timing. And it's it's 10,000 hours kind of thing, right? Like you just need to get all of those reps in. And I think Pearsall has what, I don't know if I can say that he's proven so far, right? But like he has looked very good against man coverage, and he'll get a lot of opportunities early in the season to establish that rapport with Brock Purdy while Brandon Ayuk is out. Who knows what's going to happen with this Juwan Jennings thing? Kyle Shanahan seems extremely sick of the situation. The defense on paper doesn't look great, but I don't think it'll be a bottom unit like a lot of people think. I think Robert Saleh gets the most out of his players, and we can see them overperform a little bit. But at this ADP of 59 overall, he's starting to get a little more expensive, but he's just a guy that I want exposure to, because I'm not going to be, could absolutely see him put up just these monster games that we saw a couple of those when he really starts getting into the groove last season.
Yeah, I mean, so he did have a couple at the very end of the year. For the course of the year, he didn't earn a ton of targets per out, and he wasn't a huge production guy coming out. The production profile was more concerning than the athleticism, and some of the other parts of the profile were exciting. But a receiver, we do typically want to see that you can take that athleticism and translate it into production. I think I was thinking about a different player when I said that there's been a repeated references to this. I was thinking of Adonai Mitchell, where every single time they talk about him, they mention a consistency issue.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Pearsall, I do think it's interesting that they have talked about this timing thing from the perspective of him like not getting to his marks and not being where he needs to be as it relates to the fact that he's never really been a big target earner. And so you have that element of it. There was another quote from July 29th that you had a little bit earlier from Kubiak, the OC, where he just said the more he's out there, the more you see how polished his route running can become. He got so much better against man coverage as last season went on. That excites me a lot. He gets better and better the more he's out there. He's just got to stay out there and stay healthy and take care of his body. I think the sky's the limit for him. I mean, when I hear quotes like that, I'm not saying that that's obviously a very positive quote, but it's like when they talk about the guys that are really, really good, they're not like he got so much better last year and he's still getting better. And it implies that he was multiple steps away from where he needs to be at a point. Maybe he's made that growth. I do think it's important to frame it and contextualize what he did as a prospect, from that understanding that he did have room to go. Like he did have growth that was needed, I think, in terms of the route running and the target earning. And I do think they're going to throw a lot of volume at him. So it may be really, and he's so athletic and he's so talented. He's got great hands.
Yeah.
I think it may pan out really, really well because they're going to just keep giving him all of these opportunities. Obviously, first round draft capital. But that's the part of it that I'm a little bit concerned of, is just this thing of like, can he create easy separation like you need to at the NFL level and get to where he needs to go so that Purdy can get the ball to him when he needs to get it to him? Because ultimately, if you need to put extra juke moves on every single route to create separation, you just can't be a long-term NFL wide receiver. You got to be able to do it quicker and easier at the NFL level. So, I mean, it does become a problem. And maybe that's already there for him. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I think what is a little bit underrated when we're talking about Ricky Pearsall is the potential for him to get some of the Deebo Samuel rushes, right? When we're talking about how athletic he is, and we saw a little bit of that last season. But if he's getting a couple of these jet sweeps per game, then that obviously helps out his fantasy prospects as well. Next wide receiver is Deebo Samuel, who has an ADP of 66 on Underdog. Just mentioned him a second ago. Ben, this guy was on your list. Lead us off on Deebo.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talked about the Commanders' offense a little bit ago and how they do the quick hits to the edge. They gave him a jet motion handoff in the preseason. I thought he looked pretty decent. I think he's going to get quick passes, and he's got that yak ability. The big question with Deebo is whether he can still win downfield in a major way, and he wasn't particularly good at that last year. And then also just like whether he still has the explosiveness and the yak ability on the touches around the line of scrimmage. But this is a really great offense, and I think he's going to be in a pretty big role in terms of manufactured touches and those things. If you go look at last year, the guy who got a lot of that was Olamide Zaccheaus. But Terry McLaurin doesn't necessarily get a lot of those types of plays. He's more of a vertical weapon. And I think they brought in Deebo because he fits what they want to do with those RPOs and those quick throws and those, passes to the edge that are like run extensions. Very similar to what Devon Achane does in the Miami offense. It's all just to spread the defense horizontally pre-snap, continue to, make them have to have numbers in different places. And Deebo's going to get the ball when they don't do that. And when the defense doesn't, account for that potential and have enough defenders over on that side of the field or what have you. And that's you can rack up a lot of receptions in those things. But the question is like whether the explosiveness is still there as it relates to him getting pneumonia last year. And he was pretty good in the first couple games and then was really bad after for most of the rest of the year. But there's a lot of people that have said, you get pneumonia and that's what happens. So, I mean, it's tricky. He's a tricky one. He's 29. He's had more hits on his body than most receivers. 29's old for a running back. This is a guy who's had almost like not a running back career, but he's had a lot of rush attempts over the course of his career. He's had 202 in addition to 334 receptions. So you're talking about well over 500 touches. That's not as many as running backs get to by the time they're 29, but it's a lot more than some receivers will. So you got to factor that in terms of where his age curve is and those things. And I think he could be really interesting. I think this offense is going to be really interesting. So it's tricky.
Yeah. So we saw so many design throws to just kind of the generic wide receiver 2 position there in Washington last year with Olamide Zaccheaus and De'Ami Brown there. And I mean, Deebo is just tailor-made for a Cliff Kingsbury offense. We could see a lot of PPR scamming from him this season, and I thought he did look very explosive in the limited time he got during their preseason game. They gave him that jet sweep that he takes down the field quite a bit. I think it was like a 15-20 yardish gain, something like that. Dan Quinn has been talking about how good he looks in camp, how explosive he looks. Beat writers have corroborated that as well. The general manager, Adam Peters, who was very familiar with him from their time in San Francisco. Dan Quinn talking about how he's played against Deebo Samuel before, and like I've seen that movie. I've been on the other side of that when he gets the ball in his hands, and we want to use that. We want to exploit that here. So I think a very reasonable ADP of 66 overall could absolutely see him getting a lot of touches. And we have this recency bias from what happened in the last half of last season. You mentioned he's crushing at the beginning of the season. He picks up an injury. He also gets pneumonia. He said he felt like he was going to die when he was in the hospital. And then he's back on the field just like 2 or 3 weeks later from that. Like, you're not able, like that can get you out of game shape pretty quickly. And he's not able to work out and all that while he's so sick. And when he came back, he didn't look great. He looked like a player who was coming off of pneumonia. He looked like a player who almost just died. So I'm willing to forgive him that second half of last season when he returned from that. I think I like him a lot. He was nearly a flag plant for me this year. He and Isaiah Pacheco were like right on the cusp. So I'm definitely into him this season.
Nice.
Next up is kind of a pairing here that you nominated that I also wanted to talk about because I'm in the same boat that you are. This is Rome Odunze, who has an ADP of 64 overall on Underdog, and Caleb Williams, who has an ADP of 114 overall on Underdog. What are your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, I mean, Ben Johnson comes over. Last year's coaching staff was bottom of the basement with Eberflus and Shane Waldron, and then they both get fired, and then you're left down the stretch with, I mean, one of the things that we don't necessarily talk about as much is when coaches get fired, sometimes the interim coaches can be good, but you're left with a whole offensive system that was poorly conceived, and then you don't even have the people that conceived it in the building anymore, and now you got other people trying to run the interim coaches sometimes don't have answers necessarily either. And so the whole thing just really unraveled late last year. You see Kaleb Johnson holding the ball way too long, taking a ton of sacks. You get all sorts of issues there. He also missed a lot of throws. There's like legitimate criticism on Caleb Williams. I think probably the process gets sped up in the pocket for him to some degree. One of the guys he missed the most throws to was Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze had several plays last year where he's wide open. Caleb kept missing the whole shot between the cover 2 corner and safety, like up the sideline, 25, 30 yards downfield. There was multiple times they had touchdowns where that throw is going down inside the 10 for like a catch and step into the end zone from maybe the 30-yard line. And Caleb was just sailing this throw over and over again. It was the one thing the offense would consistently get. He missed Odunze on it multiple times. I know he missed Keenan Allen on it once as well. There's like 3 or 4 of these throws last year for the Bears. Missed opportunities. And Odunze did his part on a number of these plays, but doesn't actually get the production. He ends up with a really high rate of off-target throws. And his efficiency is really poor. And you look at it from a historical perspective, for him to have a yards per out run as low as his doesn't bode well for year two. Even though, he was just a rookie in those things, it's tough to completely rebound. And yet, if somebody's going to do it, the Kaleb and Odunze combo coming from a Shane Waldron offense to a Ben Johnson offense, it does feel like it's potentially plausible. They go out and they make a bunch of upgrades in the interior of the offensive line, and they have a much better group there up front, should be able to protect Williams a little better. Then there's the whole element of Ben Johnson coming in and immediately saying, hey, we want to, in addition to all the stuff you said, they want to get the 70% completion and all that number that we talked about on the DeAndre Swift topic. In this situation, the other thing that they talked about with Caleb Williams is wanting him to work under center, which he's never really done. And he had some quotes on that all offseason. It was one of the big storylines I thought was fascinating when I was doing my projections and I was working through all the quotes you've compiled. It's a whole offseason of him saying, we'll get in there and we'll see if we can do that. He never did it in college. He never did it even all the way back in high school. He hasn't really ever operated out of an under center offense. And my understanding is the way that the offseason went, or the preseason went, that didn't necessarily go great. They started using quite a bit of shotgun in the preseason when the first team was playing. And so it's not even running the Ben Johnson offense necessarily the way they want to run it. Part of the reason he wants to be under center is to, they love to talk about pairing the run designs to the pass designs and then play action off of that. All the stuff they did with Jared Goff in Detroit seems like they may not be able to do all of that. And so the offense may be handicapped a little bit from what Ben Johnson wants to do at first, and just trying to find some things that they can actually do well is what it seemed like. It was weird to me in the preseason they weren't running more under center, because that's the thing they need to work on. And it felt, and there's been negative reports through camp, and it felt to me like he was like, I'm already throwing that out. I just got to find some positive stuff, period. We'll go to the shotgun stuff. But if they go into the season and his whole offense is now handicapped to just doing his shotgun packages, that's probably not the way that he wants to do things and the way that he's always done things. And yet at the same time, way better offensive line, better situation, better weapons around these guys, etc. Year two, second year of seasoning for Caleb Williams, the potential for a rebound. There's a lot of other elements to it. And so it is a really tricky one for me. I think there's the clear possibility that these two guys are both much better this year, just because, even with the handicap of basically only running shotgun and not being what Ben Johnson really wants to do, it still may just be a way better offense than what they had last year, even acknowledging that part of it. So the whole thing is tricky to figure out. This is one of the biggest, I don't know what to expect situations in the entire league this year, but I do think there's upside. I do think there's the potential for Caleb Williams to be a meaningful mid-round quarterback selection, and for Odunze to rebound in a big way. Maybe a little less excited about him just because you do have DJ Moore, you have Burden, you have Colston Loveland. There's so many weapons. But I don't know what to expect. Where are you at on these guys?
Yeah, they talked during the offseason a lot about, hey, we want to be an under center team. That's when you can really hit teams on play action, right? Is when you're running so much under center. We saw that in Detroit with Jared Goff and Ben Johnson, and Ben Johnson and their new offensive coordinator Declan Doyle just kept talking about it early in the offseason about, we want to be an under center offense. Caleb Williams has always been a shotgun quarterback, and we're going to try to make it work under center. And if we can't, then we'll just have to kind of adjust and pivot and go from there. From the preseason stuff, it makes you wonder if they are pivoting. And then Ben Johnson in a press conference yesterday is talking about Caleb Williams is most comfortable in an up-tempo kind of like 2-minute drill type offense where he's getting the ball out, he's hitting these check downs, and it just all ties back to this. We want to get him to 70% completion rate. We want to raise his quarterback EPA, because to Ben Johnson, that is the number one thing that you look at on whether you win or lose a game. It's not turnovers on offense. It's actually the passing EPA for the quarterback. So I'm super interested to see how much they actually do run under center versus shotgun, and like how much up tempo are they using, right? If this is actually where he is the most comfortable, like do they run that a lot, right? They have the horses out on the field to just like run up and down. It all comes back to, how does Kaleb Williams perform? How comfortable does he feel in the offense? And then with Odunze, what I'm struggling with is, again, what Ben Johnson is saying of, we're not going to launch the ball downfield a lot like you saw in this offense last season, right? it did not work out between these two. But in the preseason, we see Kaleb Williams targeting Odunze quite a bit. So that has me very interested in Odunze, and he was a very good prospect coming out. You know, the yards per route run and first downs per route run, not great for Odunze last year, but how much of that is just because the offense was so terrible, you know, that you may, like, do we need to just throw 2024 out the window when we're talking about just all kinds of stats for these guys on this team? There's a lot of guys to figure out on this offense. What is DJ Moore's role going to be here? They're using him in the backfield. Is part of me wonders, is that just kind of doing that to make sure? I mean, obviously you don't do it unless you think a guy can be good at it, but is part of that just ensuring that we get DJ Moore some targets so he doesn't like go diva crazy on us when he's not getting all the touches in a Ben Johnson offense that is traditionally more focused on the slot receiver, which Ben Johnson said, once again, wherever I've been, slot receiver has been the focal point of my offense. If DJ Moore is not the slot receiver, right? If Odunze is not the slot receiver, like how is all of this combining to work together? I'm not sure, and I don't know if we'll get pure clarity even early in the season, like a month into the season. This could be something that just kind of evolves as the season goes on. But I would hate to be just left out in the rain with little Odunze exposure, and then he's the guy that really kind of melds with Kaleb Williams and hits this year. Next receiver here is somebody that I've nominated. It's Tyreek Hill. I'm trying to figure this guy out so hard because, I mean, he's older now, right? One of the ways that he is won is through speed. You know, if you're a very technical guy like a Devontae Adams or whatever, getting older, not as huge of a deal, right? Because you're just a really, really good route runner, and you're winning kind of more, you know, in intermediate areas than Tyreek. And with the offensive line in Miami, will Tua have time to throw it deep to Tyreek? Will he even have time to hit him on these like 20-yard crossers that was really big for Tyreek Hill a couple seasons ago? And then just like kind of the vibes, right? Like the mental place that Tyreek Hill is in. Like if anyone could go Antonio Brown this season, it seems like Tyreek Hill is definitely a candidate for that. And with an ADP of 27th overall, going right at the beginning of the third round, I know, of course, the ceiling is there, right? We talk about the ceiling with Tyreek Hill. We saw it a couple seasons ago, but like, is this an offense that's going to be conducive to making that happen again? What do you think, Ben?
I mean, the Tyreek Hill stuff it could be conducive. This offense could be conducive to that. I talked about the offense a little while ago, but the Tyreek Hill stuff just feels like it's super binary. Like he's either like lost his mind and going to go full Antonio Brown, or I mean, which is like the response to a lot of his behavior, frankly, if it's any other person. But because it's Tyreek Hill, the or is like, or he's just like normal come week one and he's just doing Tyreek Hill stuff on the field. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's just because he does this all the time. Like he's just kind of a different breed. And I mean, he was hurt last year. He had the wrist injury. He had a really down year, but it very well could have been the wrist injury. It's a lot like Deebo in that regard, where you're like, was last year was it the start of the end or was it just an injury thing? He's old, but he's also like, he's unique, man. He's he's a different type of player than a wide receiver than a lot of other guys. I have a hard time applying the age curve stuff to unique players, and so that stuff can be very challenging. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to make of him. I think he could have huge ceiling. We were drafting him in the top 5 last year, and it could have just been his wrist that prevented that, and he could come back out this year. And I mean, if people are wrong about Miami, I think he could have just a monster ceiling. And then on the flip side of that, I think he could not be in the offense, get traded, get cut. Like, I mean, there's so many variables with him. And so I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think he's what I have no idea about.
All right. We're glad to know we're both in the same boat there. Next player is another that I nominated, and it is Packers wide receiver, Jayden Reed. I mean, we know this guy's a really good football player. We know he's a good wide receiver. Green Bay does not seem interested in playing him in 2 wide receiver sets. They're talking about how, they drafted Matthew Golden. They drafted Savion Williams. Now we can help keep Jayden Reed more fresh. I don't know how you could keep him more fresh than you were already keeping him last season. And he does pick up an injury there kind of near the end of last season. Now he's dealing with an injury as well. They're saying that they're hoping he'll play week 1, but with Matthew Golden there, selecting a wide receiver in the first round for the first time in 23 years, everything that General Manager Brian Gutekunst had said this past offseason, talking about how like we need a reliable guy in the passing game that can, on third down, that can move the sticks. And then they draft Matthew Golden, and we say, well, we with the Packers wide receivers, they just distribute the ball. There's never going to be a true wide receiver one there. Well, what if the guy that they drafted, the first wide receiver they drafted in the first round in 23 years, might be a wide receiver one for them that they have been searching for? I think a team would like to have a number 1 wide receiver, because that means that guy is really, really fucking good, right? Yeah. So if Matthew Golden is really, really fucking good, then maybe he's the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. And we're probably not seeing Jayden Reed in 2 receiver sets again this year. And, for best ball, whatever, maybe he'll give us some of these 30-point weeks that we've seen in the past from him, but seems like a real nightmare to roster in a managed league. What's your temperature on Jayden Reed?
Yeah, I mean, he's one that I do think is tough to figure out. He's one, particularly as it relates to the routes and those things. I do expect him to throw more this year. He didn't even run 400 routes in last season or in either of the first 2 seasons of his career, which is very small. It's not just because he doesn't play in 2 receiver sets. A normal 3 receiver set, slot guy would run over 400, would run probably at least close to 450 or closer to 500. But the Packers had the lowest situation neutral pass rate in the entire NFL last year. They threw the 3rd fewest passes in the NFL. A lot of that was because of Jordan Love's injuries. And so Reed's a really fascinating one. When you get into the per route data, both years of his career, he's over 2 yards per route run, which is a really strong indicator of legit talent that we've seen from not a huge group of wide receivers over the years. And those receivers have traditionally gone on to be really good football players. And so like when you talk about the Matthew Golden upside case, part of what I think about is like they already have that guy. Like they already have a guy that you're hoping Matthew Golden can be a 2+ yards per out run type wide receiver. Now, Golden would potentially do it with a lot more routes. And that's what, to your point, I think is a very valid point. But with Reed, I'm optimistic that he's going to run more routes this year, even though he's coming into the year hurt, just because they're going to drop back more and that the yards per out run stuff translates better. But I mean, I do think there's real cause for concern with the injury and the fact that Golden could just be such a stud. Even if Golden's good, I guess my perspective is that Reed has shown to be meaningfully better than the other guys on the team. He's had a lot better yards per out run than the other receivers so far in his career and over the last couple of years. So like Dobbs and Wicks and those guys, I don't think would be a big threat to Reed as the second target. I think Tucker Kraft could be in a certain type of way. And if they still run the ball a bunch, they could. I mean, they had a kind of a rough August where they didn't look good in their limited preseason action with Jordan Love out there, and then he hurts his hand, and then obviously Reed's hurt, and Dobbs has had a little thing, and Golden's about the only guy that's doing anything well. It's very similar to the Pearsall situation in San Francisco. So I understand the optimism for Golden entirely, but I guess the Reed thing for me is like, yeah, I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm typically fine drafting the players that have what I think are very clear talent profiles that are like they're good at football and they're in like ambiguous situations where a lot of the other guys maybe aren't. And so Golden, I would take away from that because even if Golden elevates, like I'm saying, I think Reed could be the second guy that they could both get there. So anyway, I've been playing Reed pretty meaningfully on that perspective that, 2 straight seasons with the really strong yards per out run numbers is pretty positive.
Yeah, ADP of 83 overall on Underdog, been dropping a little bit throughout the drafting season, and like you're saying, I think a bet on Jayden Reed is just a bet on talent, which we know he has the talent. Now let's see Green Bay utilize that this year. A couple wide receivers left here to talk about. A guy that I am nominating that I cannot figure out, and the market seems to be saying we have this figured out, but I'm not there yet, is Keenan Allen. That this is a guy who, the Chargers could have signed much earlier than they did. Like, was Mike Williams retiring really the driving force behind, okay, well now we got to get Keenan Allen? Like, I don't know. Well, first of all, I don't know what position he's going to play. Like, is he going to play mainly out of the slot? How much will he be in the slot? How much will he be outside? And then how often will he actually be on the field for the chart? Like, is he a full-time, just every down type starter for them? Or is he someone that they're going to use situationally on like a third? They need a conversion on third down in the red zone where he's traditionally been very good. Do you have like a good bead, do you think, on what we will see here?
No. No. Keenan Allen had a rough year last year. So Allen's an interesting one because a few years back, 2021, we see his targets per route dip. And so I like to look at players' skill level and efficiency through a per route lens. Yards per route can be split into targets per route and yards per target. So it's like, how much are you earning on a per route basis? And then what are you doing after you earn the target? I call it after the target efficiency, right? And so 2021, his targets per route fell to a pretty low number by his standards, and his yards per target had fallen in 2020, and it stayed low again in 2021. So now you had 2 years of low yards per target, and the target per route is starting to fall off a little bit. 2022, he doesn't actually run that many routes because he's banged up, but what we saw was a rebound in the yards per target, which was something I thought was interesting. He actually got a lot more efficient, and so I was playing him in 2023 pretty meaningfully because I thought he'd reverse some of those trends a little bit. Had a big 2023. It was an awesome outcome for anyone who was playing him in 2023. I still played him a little bit more in 2024. The reason I'm going all the way back in this profile is in 2024, we saw it decline really bad again, and even more so. So the targets per route fall meaningfully below even those 2021 and 2022 sort of lulls. The yards per target fall below the 2020 and 2021 lulls. And so sometimes like a guy will dip and rebound a little. And that's what you're hoping for, I think, with like Deebo this year or Tyreek Hill or something. Once I see that second dip, and as meaningful as this one was, because both parts of it fell, his yards per route run fell all the way to 1.36. When he was dipping in 2020 and 2021, he was at 1.91 and 1.78. The other relevant years are all over 2 for him. I mean, he's a player that is consistently over 2 yards per route run. In 2023, it was at 2.36. He fell all the way to 1.36. Now, we just got to talking about the Shane Waldron offense being an absolute disaster, and yet he didn't look great on film either. He's risen quite aggressively for what I think the profile probably is at this point of his career. If you look back at his prime, 2016, 17, 18, he's over a 2.5 yards per out all 3 years. So that starts to first fall 2019, 2020, and 2021. He's below that. When guys are not able to get back to their prime, even in the spike seasons, you're probably, on the downslope of the age curve. That's not true for every old receiver. Like Mike Evans had a career high yards per out run this last season. And some of those types of guys are still producing in ways that are relative to their peak are still, close. Keenan Allen, for me, somebody that production last year and the multi-year like static where it's been down and then back up and then now it's even lower. It's a trend that's working the wrong direction. I think he's going to have some meaningful production and situational usage as you talked about, but I don't think he's really going to be able to compete with Ladd McConkey for a lot of the stuff that Ladd does. I don't think he's a huge threat to Ladd, but people seem to. He fell a little bit as well on the Keenan Allen signing.
Yeah, I do not think he is a threat to Ladd McConkey really at all. I think it's more of, okay, well, past Ladd McConkey, right? When we're talking about Quentin Johnston and Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith, how much does Keenan Allen end up affecting those guys? Keenan Allen is going 122 overall right now. He's going at the beginning of the 11th round, which is, man, that's such an expensive price for a 33-year-old receiver who, like you said, has been in decline. We've seen it. We've seen the metrics. We've seen it on film, and I'm just not sure he has this, locked down, always on the field role for the Chargers. And I'm not entirely convinced that he's going to be super productive for them this season. Very last wide receiver to talk about here. Another guy I nominated, Dante Thornton, a rookie wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders. I think he was like a 5th round pick by them, but he has been running with the ones. I mean, it seemed like almost immediately he was running with the ones. And we get a lot of quotes from the coaching staff about it's so rare that you get a guy of this build, right? Who's like tall and strong and just as fast as he is. And, talking about this deep connection that Geno Smith is trying to form with him in practice. The connection has not gotten there yet, but they keep working on it. We end up seeing it come to life a little bit on like a 20-yard touchdown throw in this last preseason game for the Raiders, which, of course, rockets that ADP up a little bit more. I don't know. First of all, well, it seems like he will be playing with the starters, but is this just another sacrificial X for the Raiders that we saw in Trey Tucker last year? Now, of course, it's a completely different system. It's a new head coach. It's a new offensive coordinator. It's a new quarterback. And I mean, one very positive thing is that Geno Smith over the last couple years is, the most accurate quarterback when it comes to accurate, deep throw percentage. I don't know if he's going to be like a big thing in fantasy this year, or if he's just going to be like a hyped up guy that gets run. He's on the field a lot, but he's just a cardio king. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because he's really athletic, and I mean, certainly the athleticism can play at the NFL level. He had a long touchdown in the preseason where he showed it off, and I think it is a decent fit with Geno Smith. The tricky part is what I was talking about what whether guys use that athleticism to produce in the lower levels. This guy went to Oregon initially and then eventually transferred away from there, went to Tennessee. I mean, went to two big schools, never caught more than 26 balls in a season in 4 years. 2 at Oregon, 2 at Tennessee. He plays at least 9 games every year. He has 65 career catches in 47 career games. We don't even get 2 receptions per game. That was the peak for him, was 26 catches in 13 games as a fourth-year senior at Tennessee, 2 per game there. And then the flip side of that is with those 26 catches, he has 661 yards and 6 TDs. He scores on, just a little more than 1 out of every 4 of those receptions. He averages over 25 yards per reception, which leads all of college football. And so the little bit of work he did get, it's incredible, right? It's through the roof. And so for me, the way I look at things, and I think of it more that you need more consistency. I'm having similar issues with Isaac TeSlaa, where it's like, I think he's going to have explosive plays. I think he's going to have a couple long touchdowns this year. But if in those games he only catches 2 or 3 balls, you're not actually, like, even in best ball, you're not really having an impact on that's a usable week, but it might be like 2 for 50 and a touchdown is not that great of a game on the hit weeks. And for TeSlaa, it's trickier where there's a lot of players in that passing game. He had a great preseason, very productive, but with all those guys on the sideline, Thornton's in a situation where there's a little bit more volume for him, although they've now brought in Amari Cooper. Jacoby Myers requests a trade. I'm not entirely sure how that's all going to operate, but the secondary receivers aren't nearly as strong after Brock Bowers as like the depth of weapons that they have in Detroit. But I don't know. I look at this profile and I'm like, man, why didn't he have more production at the college level if he is more than just a sacrificial X at the NFL level?
Yeah. The hands also seem to be a little bit of a concern for him. And it's, I mean, the stuff coming out on him from the coaches is this is what makes it so tough, is it's both bullish and bearish what they've been saying about him, right? Like they love the build of this guy. This is like, oh wow, like what a prototypical X receiver build here we have. Like big, strong, super fast guy. Would be nice if he could catch the ball. Would be nice if he could establish this downfield connection with Geno Smith that we keep working on in practice, and it still has not transpired throughout this entire offseason. Those are red flags for me, and it's just, okay, are we just using him as a sacrificial X to open up room for Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers to really let them eat in the intermediate part of the field? All right, that finishes up wide receivers. Got some tight ends here that we will finish up with. Very first one you nominated, Ben, is Evan Engram. Tell us about Evan Engram.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about Engram a little bit in my projections process and on some of the different shows I did, the Establish the Edge series with Leone, as a guy I wasn't necessarily sure I was buying the way the Coachspeak was being analyzed, which was, Sean Payton got asked directly about whether Engram was the Joker, and he said something like he has Joker qualities and these things, like right after Engram was signed. But later this offseason and more recently, Payton has said it very like plainly and clearly that Evan Ingram's Evan Ingram's the Joker, or he is a Joker. He's one of the Jokers. They may have multiple Jokers, but they really like Evan Engram. I've been bouncing him around. It's not necessarily that I can't figure him out at this point, but more somebody that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, and I kind of had as overrated for a bit because the way that Peyton does so much rotational stuff. And, Cortland Sutton's the only guy in the offense last year that had more than like 315 routes. And I'm like, well, I mean, Engram might get more than that, but it's tricky if he's in the, the Jayden Reed route range, right? Because they do so much rotational stuff. It seems like with the trade of Devon Vele, like this stuff's getting sorted out a little bit. Peyton's going to be a little bit more concentrated with those routes to everyone other than, because he's always had an X receiver that runs all the routes, and then everyone else is a little bit rotational. Seems like the other guys may not be quite as rotational this year, or at least the Evan Engram role may not be quite as rotational. He'll be out there in some tight end situations. He'll be out there as a slot receiver in some situations. And I'm starting to get more hyped on him as an upside mid-round tight end.
Yeah, he's going at 105 overall, which is a little expensive. He's going above guys like Tucker Kraft, who I like more. He's going above Colston Loveland, who I like a little bit more than Engram. Sean Payton called him an elite receiver. Payton talks a lot about this kind of like triangle for his offense of where it's the running back, and then it's the receiver who a lot of times can be the tight end, right? Who's like closest to the quarterback lining up and just being able to kind of pelt them with targets, which of course we see translate in these Sean Payton offenses where they're throwing the ball so much to their running backs. And then, when he had these like elite Joker tight ends, we saw that with them as well. They've talked about him a lot as like a third down and red zone guy, which is like good and bad because, okay, maybe this guy isn't on the field as much as you would want him to be, right? Like wide tight ends like Tyler Warren, right? Or what we saw from like Theo Johnson last year and stuff, but has this really compelling just receiving profile that when he is in there, like they're going to throw him the ball. So like there's a lot of high value stuff for when he is on the field. For me, it's a little bit the price. It's being scared of, okay, what if he's only on the field for 55, 60% of snaps? That's kind of what has me a little bit hesitant to dive in on Evan Engram.
Yeah, makes sense.
Next tight end. Oh boy, this is a favorite. Not really a favorite. It's Kyle Pitts. He's a favorite for people to talk about. I think you had him on your list. If you want to lead us off here, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote. I think I wrote to you. Kyle Pitts belongs on this list every year forever. I mean, he's obviously still very athletic. He's a more vertical tight end, and I think there is something to the idea of like this would be the last year to try it, but you got the new quarterback and maybe there's a real good fit with Michael Penix, and it's plausible that because I think Penix really throws the intermediate and deep intermediate passes really well. I'm really into Drake London. I think that's a really strong fit. I think we know that Kyle Pitts' actual like ceiling is not as high as we once thought it might have been, but he's now priced so far down that if he's just a really good fit with the quarterback in those intermediate and deeper intermediate ranges, especially in like a half PPR underdog situation, you're talking about just needing some of those chunk plays, 15, 20-yard gains. And I mean, that's at tight end, it's easier to get into those usable weeks, and I think he can be a pretty solid tight end too in best ball.
Want to go over,
or maybe not, or maybe he's Kyle Pitts again.
Want to go over a couple of pieces of coach speak here on Kyle Pitts. I've got a couple of articles coming out this week for Fantasy Pros. One is 5 targets based on Coachspeak. One is 5 fades based on Coachspeak. Kyle Pitts fits into that latter fades category. This is offensive coordinator Zach Robinson on May 21st said, quote, "For Kyle, it's just how can he take that next step of the next level of details, the next level of consistency, all those things that we've talked about kind of with him and have talked about in the past. We're looking for that next," end quote. "We're looking for that next level of understanding of the offense and just the intent of what we're trying to get done and playing fast." Like that. This is a guy who is entering his 5th year in the NFL. You should not be talking about a guy entering his 5th year in the NFL like this. This is stuff that you say about like a rookie tight end or a tight end coming into his 2nd year who didn't get a lot of playing time in year 1, like a Ben Sennett or something like that. And it reminds me of Raheem Morris's comments about Kyle Pitts in a post-game presser on December 1st, 2024, where he said the following, quote, "I would like to see Kyle get more production. I would like to see him have more opportunities. And whether that's us getting it to him or him doing a better job, we'll figure those things out as we go," end quote. This is a guy who just cannot block. He's not a blocker, right? So, which means if he can't block, then he's just a receiver, right? Because tight ends at least can give you some semblance of blocking. So if he's a receiver, then he needs to be playing as well as a receiver. He needs to be as good as any receiver that you could put out there on the field. After those comments from Raheem Morris, this was Kyle Pitts' snap percentages in the following 5 games: 78.4%, 39.7%, 44.8%, 46.9%, 44.4%. That first game where he played on 78.4% of offensive snaps was a blowout loss. The next 4 games consisted of 3 one-score contests and a blowout win. And that's what I think it's going to be for Kyle Pitts again this year, is going to be games where they're getting blown out, games where they're trying to play catch up. Then okay, we got to put Kyle Pitts out on the field. But games where it's close, where they're leading, where they're trying to salt away games, via the run game, then I don't think he's going to be out there that much. And then now you have the fact that they've lost some players on the offensive line, including their right tackle, which means that you need even better blocking now from your tight ends, and Kyle Pitts is not able to provide that. Man, I'm like pretty out on him at an ADP of 139, which, like, how many spike weeks do you need at 139? Like,
I don't know, not very many probably, but I don't disagree that like he's risky.
Yeah.
And like the Coachspeak all being like, yeah, this guy's not very good is not good.
Yeah, it's not ideal. So yeah, if it's, I could see him having like 3 or 4 spike weeks, games where they're losing and got to get Kyle Pitts involved. But man, I would not want to touch him in a managed league, in any sort of league where I have to make the decision of, am I going to play him in the lineup this week? Like, you're really just doing that in games where the Falcons are underdogs by 7+ points. Next, tight end here, talking about snap percentages and all that, and this guy is squarely in that category, is Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid. Like, how much is this guy going to see the field? Khalil Shakir seems like he's going to be back for week 1. So like that's their guy running out of the slot there. They have this everybody eats mentality on offense, but at the same time you have, some Bills beat writers saying, I think this is going to be a big year for Dalton Kincaid, which, we heard that last season as well. And that did not transpire. Do you have any strong feelings one way or the other on Kincaid?
Not really. I was pretty into him last year, so he's one of those guys where you're like, oh, he hurt me last year, and you never really get around to figuring out whether you're in or out. I I think it's fairly easy to be out from the perspective that all the Bills Coachspeak stuff is, everybody eats or whatever it is. Everyone's going to get the ball. The recent one was about their wide receivers, and I just thought it was hilarious. They said something like, we think all of our wide receiver 1 through wide receiver 8 are going to play roles, and they're going to be involved. And I'm like, 8? Like, I get it, but like, come on, man.
Tyrell Shavers.
Yeah. They think every dude on their roster is like, needs to have a package and needs to be used. I was talking about Sean Payton, and his offenses and the routes limitations because of how they rotate things. And I mean, that's been the Bills' MO the last couple of years, pretty clearly saying like, we're going to have situational impactful players. They're telling you they're not a fantasy football offense. Like that's more or less what it is. Like, you can play Josh Allen, and I think you can play James Cook. And for me, that's it, dude. Like, I don't play a lot of these guys. I think you can take a little bit of Ray Davis, but people are talking about the one game where James Cook missed last year and Ty Johnson started, but then Davis had all the work. And I think that was a hot hand thing. It was one game. I mean, we've had that before with like Alexander Madison when he would have the one game blowups with Dalvin Cook, and then he got the chance to be the starter, and it wasn't the same thing. And they really like Ty Johnson. It's not just at receiver or tight end. They really like Ty Johnson. They use him a bunch. They talk about him a bunch. And I think if James Cook missed a bunch of time, Ray Davis is probably not the league-winning handcuff that some people think he is just because he's on a good offense, because I think they split still. I think that's an issue with their wide receivers, and I think it's an issue with Kincaid because I think they're going to still use Dawson Knox, and I think Kincaid's going to have a strong targets per route, but I just don't think the routes are ever going to get big enough, or that's at least the vibe. But maybe I'm missing something. I've had enough people bring it up to me now that I'm open to it. I can't get around to. I can't get excited about when it seems like an organizational philosophy thing, and tight ends already get rotated too much, and just getting enough routes is the big deal at tight end. I'd rather just wait a little longer and find a guy that I think has some real routes upside, like Brenton Strange or Chiga Conquo. Those guys look like they might run a ton of routes. Like, go grab one of those guys a little later.
And you're right. They're going rounds later. Dalton Kincaid, 132 overall on Underdog. The coaching staff has, talked about, and the general manager, Brandon Beane, as well for months of, before training camp. We're talking about the play strength being a problem for Dalton Kincaid, and he needs to improve that. Reportedly he's bulked up a little bit. We know that the Bills is like running, kind of heavier sets. They enjoy being able to run the ball, right? We see 6-0 linemen sometimes. We see a lot of Dawson Knox in there, who's a really good blocker. Yeah, this is a pretty expensive price for Dalton Kincaid, and another guy that, maybe he gives you some good spike weeks for best ball, but just another dude that I would I would not want to be making this decision on a weekly basis of, do I play Dalton Kincaid or like Hunter Henry this week? A couple more tight ends left here. First one up, had some very big news yesterday. He's engaged. He is betrothed to Taylor Swift. It's Travis Kelce, who has an ADP of 94 overall on Underdog. We saw last season that he was not super involved. He was not a focal point of the offense like he had traditionally been in the past. He's getting a little bit older. Are they managing him a little bit more to make sure that he's 100% by the end of the season? You have the Rashee Rice stuff, which we just got the news that he's suspended for the first 6 games of the season. So while he's out, could certainly see Kelce doing his normal shorter to intermediate stuff. But then when Rice gets back, that's also an area of the field that Rashee Rice operates in. It's an area that they had Xavier Worthy operating in last season. Of course, they're once again talking about wanting to return back to their deep passing roots. They have probably a left tackle now in Josh Simmons, who may be able to provide that, allow them to do that this season. But this is a guy at the same time, like, would we be completely surprised if he ends up finishing as like a tight end 4 or 5 on the season. Where's your head at, Ben?
I mean, that wouldn't be like crazy surprising, but I do think part of what he did last year was just because of all the other injuries and those things, and they needed to rely on him a little more than they wanted to. There were some quotes from last offseason that you had about Andy Reid sort of, implying they wanted to reduce his routes a little bit as he got older. And the year prior, he had run fewer routes than he had in several seasons. He was down to 513 routes in 2023. He was over 600 in both 2021 and 2022, which are massive numbers for a tight end. Even 500 is great. But he was down at 513, and it seemed like that's where he was going to be. And that's part of why his price got a little cheaper going into 2024. And then he shot back up to 575. And I think in part because they just needed it. But he was second in the league among tight end routes. The bigger issue for me is that the efficiency side really cratered. So for most of his career, yards per reception for him were 12 plus, like for his whole career until 2023. It's 12 to 13.5 ish, similar kind of player, catches the ball at a certain depth and has some after the catch ability at times. 12.2 was his career low. In 2023, it did fall to 10.6. And so that's about a yard and a half below his previous career low. Last year, it was all the way down to 8.5, 2.1 yards lower than that. So now we're 4 yards below where he was in his prime in terms of how much he's translating, his receptions into yardage. The yards per target side of it also craters. Obviously very similar stats. It's just catch rate that's the difference between those two things. But we see that the targets were still there, the receptions were still there, the targets per run are still, or route per route run are still really strong, but the yards per out run crater because the yardage efficiency is just not there anymore. Which if you dig under the hood, like his evasion rate is horrible. In his prime years, it's like 50, it's like 0.15 or 0.16 missed tackles forced per touch or per reception, or however you're looking at that. It's not great. Good running backs are up around like 0.3. He's like half of that, but he's a tight end. He was down at like 0.04 or whatever it was last year per touch. I mean, it's about a quarter of his prime. Just basically becoming a catch and fall down player at this point in his career, which, I mean, I think there will be volume for him when Rashee Rice is not there and stuff, but they now have Rice back this year to take a lot of that work. And I think Rice is sort of the heir apparent to Kelce in this offense in terms of running some of those sit down routes and those intermediate range routes. And then Jalen Royals, they draft and they talk about how he's a spitting image of Rashee Rice. And he's another dude that's going to be, they're trying to build a redundancy in those areas. I don't think there's necessarily like a tight end that's going to take over for Kelce. I think the future of this offense is more wide receiver heavy than it's been in the past. And those are the guys, Rice and Royals, that start to take some of that work. And if those guys are healthy and out there a lot this year, I think it starts to cut into Travis's volume. And then the efficiency side is a pretty big concern. And at the same time, he just got engaged to Taylor Swift. So what do I know?
Final tight end here, final player that we're going to talk about is Zach Ertz, who has an ADP of 163 on Underdog. I thought it was really, really interesting. There was something that Dan Quinn said this offseason. It was just kind of an offhanded comment he made. It wasn't even asked about it, but was saying how, last year when they brought in Zach Ertz, the vision for him was really just third downs and red zones where he's just very, very good at finding open spots and, areas in the zone, and just boom, you got a first down, you got a touchdown. They weren't expecting him to play as many snaps as he did last year, but he was just so good for them that they could not keep him off the field. And this is a guy who has blocked many promising young tight ends throughout his career. We saw it with Dallas Goedert in Philly. We saw it with Trey McBride in Arizona. And Zach Ertz ends up getting hurt in Trey McBride's second year. And we're like, holy shit, this Trey McBride guy is awesome. Why was Zach Ertz playing ahead of him? Coaches love this guy. And Dan Quinn couldn't get enough of him last season. He is, I believe, 34 years old now. So like really kind of getting up there. I wonder if this is the year, right, where Dan Quinn is saying, okay, so that original vision that we had of just third downs and red zone, we're going to go more a bit in that direction and not have him on the field quite as much this year. Do you have any strong feelings on Zach Ertz?
Not really. I mean, you talk about a catch and fall down tight end, like he's the dude. But he had a lot of, I mean, 66 catches last year, and then he had the playoff game where he had like 11 catches in their playoff loss. I don't know. I ended up projecting him for more catches than I wanted to project him for, but I still don't take him.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? But he probably will catch. This, to me, I don't think it's the same play as a Travis Kelce play, but if you're into that type of play, I maybe would just rather do it in the late rounds. And like, to me, there's some similarities in what Kelce is now and what Ertz is. Kelce's going to stay more in the offense. As you talked about, there's some potential that Ertz's role is kind of cut back. So it's different, but it's also a lot cheaper. And I don't think you want to be drafting a ton of guys at this age where there's age cliff concerns and all those things. But yeah, I don't have strong feelings on him either way.
Yeah. All right. That was our final player. This was nearly 2.5 hours, and it absolutely flew by. Like I said, man, I love talking ball with you. I appreciate you coming on. Please let us know what you got going on, where we can find you.
Yeah, the newsletter's at bengretch.substack.com. My other podcast is Stealing Bananas with Sean Siegel. Very fun podcast over there. And yeah, we're just getting ready for week 1, man. My in-season article, Stealing Signals, I break down every team every week, Mondays and Tuesdays. That's what the newsletter is named after. That's what I'm known for. I've been writing that article for like 8 years now. So yeah, come over there, and it's a premium newsletter. Subscribe, try it out.
Do it. Sub right now while you're at it. Maybe hit that like thing or comment, whatever the SEO demands of us these days. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. This was an awesome conversation, and I look forward to our next conversation, which I'm sure will be equally stimulating. All right, y'all. Peace.